You've heard the legends, cowboys chewing on leather, pioneers surviving on bark stew, and every settler dining on cornbread 3 times a day. But how much of it is true? In this video, we're rounding up the wildest food myths of the American frontier and separating grit from gristle. Saddle up, because we're serving facts with a side of history. Myth number 1. Cowboys only ate beans. Beans were a staple, but not the whole story. While beans were indeed a chuck wagon classic, they were far from the only thing on a cowboy's plate. Beans were often cooked with salt pork, onions, and spices like chili powder or cumin to add flavor and variety. Cowboys also ate beef from the trail, biscuits made from sourdough starters, and even stews packed with vegetables when available. Chuck wagon cooks, known as cookies, were resourceful and often carried dried goods like rice, cornmeal, and flour, along with preserved meats and lard. They'd forage for wild onions, garlic, or herbs to enhance meals, and when cattle were slaughtered, nothing went to waste, from steaks to organ meats. 2 popular dishes were cowboy beans and Texas cowboy stew. Cowboy beans combined pinto beans, bacon or salt pork, onions, and molasses or brown sugar for a sweet, savory kick. Texas cowboy stew was a one-pot meal with ground beef, sausage, potatoes, corn, and beans simmered in a tomato-based broth with chili powder and cumin. These meals were hearty, high-calorie, and designed to fuel long days in the saddle. Myth number 2. Saloons only served whiskey and beer. Saloons offered a surprising variety of drinks. While whiskey and beer were the most iconic beverages in Old West saloons, they were far from the only options. Many saloons served coffee, tea, lemonade, and non-alcoholic tonics like sarsaparilla or birch beer. In fact, sarsaparilla, a root-based soft drink, was wildly popular and often marketed as a health tonic. Some saloons even brewed their own beer or cider, especially in areas with German or Irish immigrant populations. The drinks weren't always refined, but they were diverse and adapted to local tastes and available ingredients. Cowboy cocktails also emerged during this era, blending rugged simplicity with bold flavors. One example is the Stone Fence, made with rye whiskey and apple cider over ice, garnished with mint. Another is the Brown and Gold Derby, a citrusy bourbon cocktail with grapefruit juice, lime, and honey lemongrass syrup. These drinks were often improvised with what was on hand, but they reflected a growing cocktail culture that would later flourish. Even beer cocktails like the Black Butte Porter Bloody Mary, a spicy mix of tomato juice, tequila, and porter, have roots in this inventive spirit. Myth number 3. Food was always stale or bland. Chuck wagon cooks were flavor magicians. The idea that frontier food was dull and tasteless doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Chuck wagon cooks, often former trail hands or Civil War veterans, were masters of improvisation. They carried dried herbs, chili peppers, garlic, and onions, and they weren't afraid to spice things up. Chili con carne, for example, was a fiery favorite made with dried beef, suet, chili peppers, and beans. Cooks also used vinegar, molasses, and even coffee grounds to deepen flavor. The chuck wagon was essentially a mobile kitchen, and the cook, or cookie, was one of the most respected members of a cattle drive crew. 2 standout recipes that prove the Old West had flavor are Texas cowboy stew and cowboy chili. Texas cowboy stew is a one-pot wonder with ground beef, sausage, potatoes, corn, and beans simmered in a tomato chili broth. Cowboy chili, meanwhile, skips the beans and leans into dried chilies, cumin, garlic, and chunks of beef or venison. These dishes were designed to be filling, flavorful, and easy to cook over an open fire or in a Dutch oven. Myth number 4. There was no fresh produce. Frontier folks grew, foraged, and traded for greens. Despite the harsh conditions, many settlers and homesteaders grew their own vegetables or traded for them at local markets. Root vegetables like potatoes, carrots, and onions stored well and were common in stews and roasts. Squash, beans, and corn, the three sisters of native agriculture, were also widely cultivated. In spring and summer, families foraged for wild greens like dandelion, lamb's quarters, and miner's lettuce, as well as berries and herbs. Even chuckwagon cooks would gather wild onions or garlic to add flavor to trail meals. Two examples of produce-rich dishes were vegetable hash and Three Sisters stew. Vegetable hash was a skillet-fried mix of potatoes, onions, and whatever greens or squash were on hand, often topped with a fried egg. Three Sisters stew combined corn, beans, and squash in a savory broth, sometimes with added venison or rabbit. These meals were nutritious, filling, and a welcome break from meat-heavy fare. Myth number 5. Inns served the same food as saloons. Inns offered full meals, not just bar snacks. Unlike saloons, which often focused on drinks and quick bites, inns and boarding houses were expected to provide hearty, home-cooked meals. Travelers could expect roast meats, fresh bread, pies, and seasonal vegetables. Meals were often served family-style at long tables, and the quality varied depending on the region and the cook's skill. In larger towns, inns competed for business by offering better food, including imported goods like coffee, sugar, or even oysters. Two common inn dishes were roast beef with pan gravy and apple pie. Roast beef was seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic, then slow roasted and served with gravy made from the drippings. Apple pie was a staple dessert, made with dried or fresh apples, cinnamon, and a flaky lard crust. These meals were comforting, filling, and a far cry from the rough fare of the trail. Myth number 6. Cowboys never ate pork. Salt pork and bacon were trail essentials. Pork was actually one of the most common meats on the frontier, especially in preserved forms like salt pork, bacon, and lard. Salt pork was heavily salted and stored in barrels, making it ideal for long cattle drives. It was used to flavor beans, fry biscuits, or add fat to lean cuts of meat. Bacon was prized for its flavor and versatility, and lard rendered from pork fat was used in everything from frying to baking. Two pork-based staples were salt pork and beans and lard biscuits. Salt pork and beans was a slow-cooked dish of pinto beans, chopped salt pork, onions, and molasses. Lard biscuits were made with flour, baking soda, salt, and lard, flaky, rich, and perfect with gravy or jam. These foods were calorie-dense and kept cowboys fueled for long days on the trail. Myth number 7. There was no dairy. Homesteads and inns relied on milk, butter, and cheese. While dairy wasn't always available on the trail, it was a staple on homesteads, ranches, and in towns. Many families kept cows or goats for milk, which was used to make butter, cheese, and buttermilk. Butter was churned by hand and stored in crocks or wrapped in cloth. Cheese was often made fresh or semi-hard and preserved with salt or wax. Buttermilk, a byproduct of butter making, was used in biscuits and pancakes. Inns and boarding houses frequently served milk with breakfast or used it in baking and sauces. Two classic dairy-based recipes were buttermilk biscuits and homestead cheese spread. Buttermilk biscuits were light and tangy, made with flour, lard, and buttermilk, then baked in a cast-iron skillet. Cheese spread was made by blending soft cheese with herbs, garlic, and a bit of cream, perfect for spreading on bread or crackers. These foods added richness and comfort to the frontier diet. Myth number 8. Bread was always stale. Sourdough and skillet breads were fresh and frequent. Bread was a daily staple, and while it didn't always come from a bakery, it was often made fresh. Sourdough starters were prized possessions, passed down through generations or shared among trail cooks. These starters allowed for fresh biscuits, pancakes, and loaves without needing commercial yeast. On the trail, cooks made skillet cornbread, ash cakes, or bannock, simple breads cooked over coals or in Dutch ovens. Even hardtack, though tough, was often softened in stews or coffee. Two popular breads were sourdough biscuits and skillet cornbread. Sourdough biscuits used a fermented starter for rise and tang, baked in cast iron. Skillet cornbread was made with cornmeal, eggs, and buttermilk, and cooked until golden with a crispy edge. These breads were anything but stale and added warmth to every meal. Myth number 9. There was no dessert. Cobblers, pies, and fried sweets were common treats. Dessert was a beloved part of life on the frontier, especially when fruit was in season. Cobblers and pies were made with fresh or dried fruit, sweetened with sugar or molasses, and topped with biscuit dough or crust. Fried doughs like fritters and donuts were also popular, especially at gatherings or holidays. Even on the trail, cooks would whip up simple sweets using dried apples, raisins, or wild berries. Two classic desserts were Dutch oven peach cobbler and apple fritters. Peach cobbler was made with canned or dried peaches, sugar, and a biscuit topping, baked in a Dutch oven over coals. Apple fritters were made by dipping apple slices in batter and frying them in lard, then dusted with sugar or cinnamon. These desserts were rustic, satisfying, and a sweet reward after a long day. Myth number 10. Saloon food was just peanuts or jerky. Some saloons served full meals and regional specialties. While many saloons offered only drinks and light snacks, others, especially in larger towns, served full meals. These included chili, fried eggs, oysters, which were shipped in by rail, and even steak. In mining towns or cattle hubs, saloons competed for business by offering hearty food to keep patrons around longer. Some even had attached restaurants or boarding services. The idea of free lunch was also real. Saloons would offer salty food like ham, pickles, and bread to encourage more drink purchases. Two examples of saloon fare were chili con carne and fried oysters. Chili con carne was a spicy stew of beef, chilies, and garlic served with bread or tortillas. Fried oysters, surprisingly common in rail-connected towns, were breaded and fried in lard, often served with hot sauce or vinegar. These dishes show that saloon food could be bold, indulgent, and far more than bar snacks. Myth number 11. Coffee was a luxury and tasted terrible. Coffee was a cowboy essential, not a rare treat. Coffee was a daily ritual on the trail and in frontier homes. Cowboys brewed it strong and black, often boiling grounds directly in a pot over the fire. It was one of the few luxuries consistently stocked on chuck wagons, and it served as both a stimulant and a morale booster. Beans were typically green and roasted on site, then ground with a hammer or the butt of a rifle. Coffee was so important that some cowboys would skip food before they'd skip their morning cup. Two classic cowboy brews were boiled cowboy coffee and campfire coffee with eggshells. The first involved tossing grounds into boiling water and letting them steep. The second used crushed eggshells to help settle the grounds and clarify the brew, a trick passed down from Scandinavian immigrants. These methods were simple, effective, and produced surprisingly good coffee. Myth number 12. Everyone drank heavily. The truth is, many preferred coffee, tea, or sarsaparilla. While alcohol was common in saloons, not everyone drank to excess. Many cowboys and settlers preferred coffee, tea, or herbal tonics like sarsaparilla. Sarsaparilla, made from the root of the smilax plant, was believed to have medicinal properties and was often served carbonated. Birch beer and root beer were also popular, especially among those who avoided alcohol for religious or personal reasons. Some saloons even offered temperance drinks to appeal to a broader clientele. Two non-alcoholic favorites were homemade sarsaparilla and birch beer. Sarsaparilla was brewed with roots, molasses, and spices, then fermented lightly or carbonated. Birch beer used birch bark or sap, sugar, and yeast to create a fizzy, refreshing drink. These beverages were flavorful, complex, and part of a rich tradition of herbal brewing. Myth number 13. Food was the same everywhere. Regional ingredients shaped frontier cuisine. The Old West was a patchwork of cultures and climates, and food varied wildly by region. In Texas, chili and cornbread dominated. In the Pacific Northwest, salmon and berries were common. In the Southwest, Mexican and Native American influences brought tortillas, tamales, and beans. In the Rockies, game meats like elk and trout were staples. Frontier cooks adapted to what was available, trading, foraging, and borrowing from neighboring cultures. Two regionally inspired dishes were Southwestern tamale pie and Rocky Mountain trout with wild herbs. Tamale pie layered cornmeal mush with seasoned beef, beans, and cheese. Trout was often pan-fried with wild herbs like sage or juniper, caught fresh from mountain streams. These meals reflected the diversity and adaptability of frontier cooking. Myth number 14. Meat was always beef. Frontier diets included venison, rabbit, and more. While beef was common on cattle drives, frontier folks ate a wide variety of meats. Venison, rabbit, squirrel, prairie chicken, and even bear were hunted and cooked. Fish like trout and catfish were caught in rivers and streams. Pork, as mentioned earlier, was preserved and widely used. Game meats were often stewed, roasted, or smoked, and nothing went to waste. Hunting was both a necessity and a skill passed down through generations. Two game-based dishes were rabbit stew and venison jerky. Rabbit stew was made with root vegetables, herbs, and a splash of vinegar or wine. Venison jerky was marinated in salt, pepper, and smoke, then dried for long-term storage. These meats were lean, flavorful, and essential to survival in remote areas. Myth number 15. Food was always cooked over a fire. Dutch ovens and stoves brought versatility. While open-fire cooking was common, it wasn't the only method. Dutch ovens were the workhorses of frontier kitchens, used to bake bread, roast meat, and simmer stews. In towns and homesteads, iron cast stoves became more common by the late 1800s, allowing for more precise cooking. These stoves had ovens, burners, and warming shelves. Even on the trail, cooks used coals and embers to create makeshift ovens with hot rocks and covered pots. These techniques show the ingenuity and range of frontier cooks. Turns out the frontier wasn't all hardtack and campfire beans. Just like the myths, the truth is more flavorful. Thanks for watching, and stay curious.